Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Cup, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your host and marketing manager here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, Mackenzie. And tonight we are doing a really special panel. We are now into the world of Stratford Cineplex, and our first production we're tackling on that forum is none other than Shakespeare's sequel, spin-off, prequel play, all about the jovial knight Falstaff, and it is the Merry Wives of Windsor. And this is the 2019 production, directed by Antoni Cimolino. It starred Geraint and Davies returning as Falstaff from 2011. We had Sophia Walker as Mistress Ford. We had Brigit as Mistress Page, Michael Blake as Mr. Page, Graham Abbey as Mr. Ford, Lucy Peacock as Mistress Quickly, and David Collins as Bardolph. So it was a wonderful, full Stratford A-list cast, and it was superb. But let's get around to start introducing our wonderful panelists. First off, we have our literary manager and man who always gives us some wonderful quotes and insights from the text, Mr. Ryan Barakovich. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. Don't get too excited this time. No, it's good to be back. I've had a little hiatus from the show, so It's nice to be returning, and what an exciting panel to be coming back into.
Yes, absolutely. What is in your cup today, good sir, as you take a sip?
As I take a sip, I have English breakfast tea, which I thought suits the Windsor setting of the show, even if this one was supposed to be Stratford, Ontario.
It totally works.
They don't have English Stratford breakfast tea. I don't know what
it totally works. Next, we have our wonderful general assistant and kind of the lady who keeps us all on track here at Cup of Hemlock, Ms. Jillian Robinson. Hello, Jill.
Hello, Mac. How are you tonight?
I'm doing very well. What is your ensemble and what is in your cup?
Right. So my ensemble today is very 50s-esque. I have this really cute sundress that has the little 50s collar, and it's got white lace over top and a little bow. Every time I have a chance to wear it, I get super, super excited. So, and then I have just these nice chunky coral earrings, again, to add some 50s flair, with the matching makeup and hair ensemble. Tonight I'm feeling a bit dehydrated, so I have opted out of the cocktail option. However, I have with me some watermelon Kool-Aid in a watermelon-esque cup to touch on the beautiful lime green and fun pink accents that this show kind of leached out. And also punch was a very common drink of choice in the 50s, so watermelon Kool-Aid, modern day punch.
There you go. Perfect. And next we have, for her third wonderful appearance on the panel, our Mistress Page of the production, Ms. Brigit Wilson. Hello again, Brigit.
Hi.
Welcome. What's in your cup tonight?
Well, tonight it is vodka and a pomegranate spritzer.
Ooh.
But I couldn't come up with a catchy name. But it's in this glass that I grew up with that I think my mother won playing bingo or getting gasoline. and the cherries on it. So I think I've called this the Merry Wives of Windor cocktail.
Ooh.
Yes.
Well done. Well done. I love that. And we have a really exciting new guest joining us this week. He has been at the festival for 11 seasons. I saw him when I was growing up going to the Stratford Shakespeare School, and every time he was on, he was just such a treat. And we've seen him throughout our entire series so far. Both Ryan and Jill have given him shout-outs, and he is the wonderful David Collins. Hello, David. Welcome aboard.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This is such a treat to have another wonderful member of the Stratford Festival join our motley crew to talk Shakespeare. This is just wonderful. So welcome. What is in your cup tonight?
Well, in honor of the wonderful character I got to play in the show, I got some 12-year-old scotch wrapped in some hot chocolate.
Ooh, love that.
Warm Bardolph.
Nice.
Warm Bardolph. Oh, that is perfect. And tonight I am drinking cranberry lemonade with a spritz of ginger ale in a blue cup, kind of going with that nice kind of 50s multicolored look. Same with my Stratford Shakespeare multicolored tie. Two. Yeah.
Yay.
So,
that tie is vintage.
yes. Yeah, I got
that one.
yeah, I've had this tie. So the first year I went to Stratford Shakespeare School in 2009. My parents bought this for me after we did our Henry V performance at the end of the week, where I was Montjoy the French Herald. And on the way out, we always did a stop by the gift shop to like pick up a T-shirt or an eraser or something just to kind of commemorate the week. And so my mom saw this tie, and it traveled with me to every Stratford Shakespeare School. And I've worn it on multiple occasions. I actually wore this. I was going back through photos from when I did Merry Wives of Windsor with Brigit, way back in 2012. And I wore this on opening night of that production too. So there we go. This tie has seen quite a bit of Shakespeare.
Can we talk about that production for a moment? Were you Robin?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So this is the fun bit of history that Merry Wives of Windsor is what brought Brigit and I together. Both Barrie people. So we were working together with Theatre by the Bay in Barrie. I was fresh out of high school, getting ready to head off to York University. And the artistic director of the company, Scott Hurst, was my acting coach. And Lee Wilson had just been my director at the Stratford Shakespeare School, and they were looking for kind of a young person who kind of knew their way around Shakespeare somewhat, to kind of fill in some of the younger character roles. So I ended up being Robin, Peter Simple, and until we cut the Latin scene, I was also Page's son, too. But we cut the Latin scene because we thought audiences will not get the Latin joke, so we caught that scene after our first read-through. But I was basically all the young people of Windsor. And Brigit got to do the other wife in that production. So this time she was Mistress Ford. So, yeah, I mean, that's Brigit. I mean, what was it like coming back to doing this play after playing the other wife?
Well, it was a great gift, of course, because the Theatre by the Bay, we didn't have the time to rehearse it the way we do at Stratford here. We had probably 10 days rehearsal and a couple of tech days, so it was up before we knew it, and it was our second show that summer. So so it was a race, to get it up on its feet and get it in front of people. And it isn't done often, so there wasn't even a reference point for me. Although I had auditioned for the production at Stratford that was the one prior to the one we did last year. So I auditioned for the one in Stratford. I didn't get it. I was so disappointed. And then I was offered the Merry Wives in Barrie that summer. And so it was great to actually get to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's great to get to revisit these plays, even if it's like 5 years later. Because those ones you don't get to do often, you can really get another good run at it, and it seems extraordinary that I'll get to do the same play, within 5 years, one that's not done often. So it's rarely ever done. I mean, if you think about it, Stratford did it in 2011, which we'll talk about when we get into our further discussions, and then they did it again in 2019. So it's quite a gap of time between the visits to Windsor. So it's really kind of a really fascinating. I forgot how short of a rehearsal time you and I had to get our production up, because you were also doing Man of La Mancha at the same time, which is another heavy play. So the fact you were doing that plus trying to master Merry Wives, you were a trooper that summer. It was actually a summer vacation, because it's Stratford. I do 3 and probably 6 understudy leads. So, it was actually, I just had to worry about my work that summer. So it was great fun.
Yeah. But then, so you came back after 5 years, you played the other wife, and then you got to do it in 2019 in a whole new setting, because our production was set roughly during the Prohibition period as Lee originally pitched it to us. We didn't fully embrace that concept because of our limited time, but that was the initial kind of time period it was set. But then you get to come back and do it in 1950s Stratford. And David Ambridge, could you kind of give our listeners a kind of really kind of neat insight look of what it was like kind of putting this production together? Because it really came together really well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that Antoni was very clear on the world he wanted to create. And I think he had an inspiration the fall before by, the end of the season is very melancholy for all of us. We know some people will go back to their lives elsewhere. We all have to say goodbye to the family we've created. And that sound, that iconic sound of the fall being the ducks, getting ready to fly in formation. I think it just triggered thoughts of the end of every season. And so it very clearly put him in the fall. He knew it had to be the fall. And I think that the 1950s idea is interesting. It was, women were right on the verge of women's lib, but in the 50s, you were still kind of trying to please your husband and toe the line and do what you needed to do, what they told you to do. And so it was right at the very end, right? So it was kind of brilliant to set it at that time. Any later, I don't know how, I'm not sure you could do it much later, but it's always been set. Even the one in 2011 was set in another century. I think it's often done in another century a long time ago. But isn't it interesting? I got to do 2 productions set in the 20th century.
That is true. That is very true.
Anyway, yeah, but Windsor Prohibition, Windsor, Ontario Prohibition was a good concept too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just had a little bit more time to incorporate some more of those elements to really set that thing. I think we would have just had it that much stronger because we had flasks in throughout the set and little fun little things like that, but we just
was the garter in like a speakeasy, or how did this work?
Kind of. I mean, we had. I mean, it was a really kind of neat set where it was this double-decker set. Very much, it was actually kind of built like the festival set, where you had that double-decker staircase with ways you can come in and out on multiple angles. You had a lot of trellises and kind of things like that you could hide behind. Yeah, but I remember Lee saying that, like, the garter was going to become more of like a speakeasy underground kind of spot to be in the original rehearsal concept.
I'm originally from Windsor, Ontario, so I wish I would have seen that production. Would have probably understood a lot of the time and place references too.
Sorry, David, a moment ago it looked like you wanted to chime in too, like reflecting on this production. Go for it.
I loved the concept, but I really didn't get what we were doing until we hit the stage, and you started seeing costume pieces showing up, and Brigit and Sophie in those dresses, and then one day it was like, this is I Love Lucy. We are doing I Love Lucy. Desi Arnaz was Graham Abbey's character. Of course, Lucy and Viv were Brigit and Sophie. And then once that sort of kicked in, I figured out, okay, now I know what I'm one of those crazy characters that shows up in I Love Lucy, does a little turn, and then. But we did it at that same kind of pace too, and using the same kind of physical comedy that made I Love Lucy so popular in the 50s. In the 70s, God, I used to watch that every day after school when I was coming home from school. But I am from the 50s, so that's also what I had to contribute to that.
Wonderful. And David, you also had a wonderful prosthetic bulbous nose, which was one of the wonderful pieces of prosthetic I've seen at the festival. Was that your idea, or is that something that the designer came in with and said, David, we got this really cool costume piece that you're gonna highlight for us?
Actually, it's Shakespeare's idea. Bardolph shows up in every play that Falstaff is in, and like you said in the beginning, this is sort of the prequel sequel for Falstaff. Bardolph was one of the gang. And in the Henry IV and Henry V, Bardolph shows up. And one thing that is repeatedly said about his character was this bulbous pock nose. That's how he's referred to by lots of characters in the handbook. They don't know his name. It's that guy with the pock nose. So when I'm doing research for this, and this nose thing came up, and I went, geez, I wonder. And I went to Judy, and I sort of pitched it to Judy, and she went, yeah, let's do it. Judy Scott, who was the designer. We went to Jerry, who runs the hair and makeup department there, and he loved the idea because it's something he hasn't done before or something new. So we set up a day, and I went in there. They covered my whole face in foam. They stuck straws up my nose so they could have the mold of my real nose. Actually, they did my whole face. That was right. And they covered my whole face with this stuff. It dried quickly, and then based on, I guess, the counter of that, Jerry built this nose. But it was always, how big should it be? Should it be huge, or should it be small? And I said, no, let's just, keep it big enough that people notice there's something wrong with this guy's face, but it's not Cyrano de Bergerac. Because then every time it walks on, it's going to be, another speech about the nose. And it's not about the nose. But for me, it was just like when you put on, I'm sure you've all taken clown classes, and you got to take the red nose, and you put the red nose on. And once you put the nose on, any good clown class tells you that the nose will tell you what to do. The nose will take over. You stop taking responsibility. And, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? The critic goes out the window, and you just let the nose do it. The first time I put that nose on, we're in the back where the makeup department is. I stuck it on my face, and I came out in the hallway. And there's always people running in the hallway, the crew, the staff, the other actors, other actresses. And all of a sudden, they had Bardolph to deal with. David was still in the makeup room, but Bardolph had arrived. And I said, God, this is so much fun, because there's no boundaries. There's no limits. Just go for it. And oh my God. And once I found that, it made what I was doing on stage make much more sense. The smaller character roles are tough, because you have to come out, you got to present something, and then disappear again. And it's got to be consistent. So at the end of the night, you come out and people go, oh yeah, it was that guy. And I'm not carrying this story, but I am adding flavor.
Absolutely.
And Falstaff was this drunken rogue, and I was just part of his posse.
Yeah.
And we hung out together through a couple of wars and 4 plays. So, yeah.
It was the nose and the flask with me too, David. That those
and
both.
The hat.
Yeah, the caricature and the archetype was so clear. It was like, oh, I've seen this guy in 50s sitcoms or
playing drunk.
Yeah.
I failed so miserably. Antoni was so patient with me. I came in first rehearsal, and there was this wonderful comedian that used to be on the Dean Martin show. Foster Brooks was his name. And he had this drunk shtick. It was so funny, stuttering and belching in the middle of the lines and doing all of this stuff. But of course, he wrote his own material. So his rhythms were all his own material. I'm trying to do this with Shakespeare. It's just forever. And Antoni's sitting, and he's listening to me, and he's being so patient. And let me figure out after the reading, okay, that's not working at all, and better come up with something else. But the trick to playing drunk is you're not playing drunk. You're a drunk guy trying to play sober. Like you're trying to play sober. That's the challenge. Anytime you get drunk, the cop, you're driving down the road, and the cop shows up, and oh my God, I'm fine. No, everything. Yeah, I'm just going home. Drink. Oh God, no.
Yeah.
And you just carry on like that. So, it was a lot of fun. The costume actually evolved too. The costume is the same costume that I wore in Napoli Millionera.
No.
Year before. The original design wasn't working on me, and Julie very generously went with me and decided to pull that out of storage. And like you said, it worked a treat.
It really did. Like, I think what was really great about this production is how each of Falstaff's gang was so easily recognizable and had their own distinct personalities that they're, because a lot of times they can all kind of blend together for the audience where like, even though you know their faces, it's like, I don't know who that is. He's just one of the posse. But like this time, watching all of you come out and interact with each other was such great organic chemistry between you and Randy and I forget the actor who played Pistol right now. Yes,
Randy was Pistol.
Yeah, sorry, Randy was Pistol. Yeah. But like all of you had just such great, wonderful chemistry, and you all were like different parts of the 1950s. Like we had the 50s greaser, the 50s kind of drunk on the bar stool.
Yep.
I have kind of like the wild Texas Elvis-y kind of guy that Randy was doing, and then you have this wonderful, cute little Robin that you all just were so gentle and wonderful with. It was really sweet watching you all together, and I totally wrote.
He was 9 years old.
9?
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
9 years old, working with all these adults on this huge stage in this massive theater, and it was water for ducks back.
Yeah.
He was the first one off book. He knew all his lines. He was sort of waiting around for the adults to catch up.
And he looked like he was having fun. He was jumping on the bed. He was getting involved in all the hijinks. It was great.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lovely.
Oh my goodness, that is fantastic. And David, I totally vote for you to reprise your role as Bardolph throughout the other Henry plays with that wonderful nose.
Yes.
So you can be a continual member of the Falstaff
regardless
posse.
of what era it's set in, just bring back 1950s bulbous nose flask Bardolph.
Actually, I've only done Henry V. I'd love to do the 4s. Yeah.
That said, David, like I've said this to Mac and Jill before, but I'll say it to you. I would really love to see your take on Falstaff. That would be like a dream for me as an audience member to see.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears.
You know? Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm sure we're going to like dive more into some of the fun backstage stories, things like that of this production. But why don't we actually dive into this wonderful Shakespearean sitcom that we're gonna do. So the first kind of question off the bat is, would you consider this Merry Wives of Windsor a sequel or a prequel to Henry IV, or would you classify this more as a spin-off that by chance features this character of Falstaff? David, why don't you start us off tonight on this topic?
I think it's the latter. From everything I read, Falstaff was such a popular character that Shakespeare wrote this play to feature this character again. You know, there had been a real, you know, it happens now. I mean, how many freaking Rambo movies have we had? Fast and Furious movies have we had? People like to see the same character, heroic or not heroic. You know, it obviously appealed to his audience then, so let's write another play. I don't think it had much of anything really to do with the Henrys, except it was the same guys.
The
gang.
Yeah, it's the same guys, but there's no Henrys mentioned at all.
Exactly, and the wars isn't mentioned at all. All of that stuff, all of their soldiering and whatnot. You know, these are the guys, frankly, that I saw as a little boy. I was a little boy in the 50s, so I saw lots of old soldiers. I saw them hanging around, you know, like now too. A lot of them were unemployed. My grandpa used to take me to the Legion. I'm, you know, 8, 9 years old, and I would sit and drink my little glasses of ginger ale because they looked better, and I could hang out with the boys. And it was these guys. All of their glory had been spent in their youth, and now they were middle-aged men that had been through war and, you know, the Depression, Prohibition, all of that stuff. And there they were in the 50s and 60s, still, you know, trying to figure it all out. Oh, sorry to get sad and morose, but
no, it's needed. Yeah,
there actually is a sadder undertone of this play that
Absolutely.
oftentimes kind of gets glanced over. But absolutely, yeah, there is this sadder undertone of who Falstaff and these men are in
Bottom
their
line
world.
is they're broke. They're
Mhm.
homeless. Falstaff is trying to hustle the Merry Wives for money because he's broke. Bardolph leaves the gang. I got a job offer in a bar where I can serve drinks and drink all day. Seems likely. Because we've been broke, we've been hungry, and we don't have enough money to get drunk all the time. So I find the solution to my problem. Falstaff thinks his solution is the two wives and Pistol and yeah, they go off trying to find ways to hustle a living themselves because their fighting days are gone. You know, they're too old to be soldiers anymore. They don't know how to do anything else. So
yeah. Actually, you're giving so many wonderful concept ideas of this men coming back from war concept that I think would be a wonderful concept to do this again with. Brigit, what are your thoughts? Like, where do you kind of fall on setting this play within the Falstaff timeline?
I think it has been determined that it is a sequel, and the rumor was that the Queen wanted to see Falstaff as a lover.
Yeah.
I think that's not actually the phrase we would use now, but what he was doing with the wives. But maybe, I mean, I haven't thought more about it than that, but, you know, piggybacking what David talks about, I guess, maybe if the Queen did say as a lover, maybe she meant just to see him more vulnerable. And that is where we meet him at this point in time. So yeah, it's melancholy. There is an undertone of sadness there.
I'll piggyback off of that, Mac, because just what Brigit is saying about like the vulnerability and you're seeing Falstaff in more of like an emotional sense in this production than I would say in Henry's. Like I wrote down in my notes, like this is a totally different Falstaff for me. Like it's a side of Falstaff we don't really see in the Henrys. And so there's just this augmentation and exaggeration of all the characters in this piece, but especially with Falstaff. And it's really neat seeing like this vulnerable, more like quote unquote human side of this soldier character from the Henrys, right? It's all crusades and battles and then you see all the, especially set in this production with all these the archetypes of the different men, like you're seeing them, and then it kind of makes you think like, what is the real Falstaff, or who, you know, is it the warrior, or is it the man trying to make way in an average town, you know? So I think it's a spin-off, more so than like I would say like a chronological sequel, just because you're seeing like the characteristics of each individual character more. But what Brigit is saying makes a lot of sense. Like just seeing the different side of these characters, and that warrants it a sequel in itself.
Well, early on in rehearsal, Antoni brought in this brilliant woman from Queen's University, I think. I can't remember her name.
Jessica Riddell. She was from Halifax. I think St. Mary's University she's with. I can't. Okay. There you go.
But she personified the gang, Falstaff and his boys, as the dysfunctional men, and that really sort of hurt. but the truth hurts. She was absolutely right. These guys can't function in normal society. They can't, keep a job, raise a family, pay their bills on time, keep the lease payments on the car. They really can't. So you're watching them trying to navigate society in their dysfunctional manner.
Ryan, as our resident TA, man going through his PhD, master's grad, where do you fall in this?
So, I think this is a really fun question, and I think it's always fun when we talk about sequels or potential sequels in these discussions. But I struggle with the chronology a bit because, Falstaff is functionally like arrested at the end of Henry IV Part 2, or at least turned away and like exiled a little bit. And then we already kind of have the Falstaff sequel, or we already have the sequel to Henry IV Part 2, and that's called Henry V. And in that, Mistress quickly has her monologue where she describes the death of Falstaff as he kind of withers away and like into nothing, sort of into what did she say, Arthur's bosom.
Hold on, I can find out.
Yeah, so I struggle to think, how does this plot of Merry Wives make sense after like 2H4, because where
that's Shakespeare. All of that, none of that stuff matters. I'm writing the story now. It's 2:00 in Rome in the time of Julius Caesar. Nobody's got clocks. Time is out the window, you know. A trip around the world, a trip to Illyria takes about 10 minutes. Opening storm in the Tempest takes about 3 minutes, you know. Time and all of that stuff, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to get bogged down with that.
I don't want to get bogged down. I think it kind of just makes me prefer the idea that maybe this is more of a prequel. This is before Falstaff met Hal. And this would be like kind of just the unrelated adventures of Falstaff trying to be a lover after the wars. Like, keep in mind, he's as terrible a lover in this play as he is as terrible a soldier in Henry IV. Like, I see his failure.
Absolutely granted, sure. And for that argument, for sure. You know, but bottom line, in a prequel, sequel, you know, even the Henrys, they stand alone on themselves. You don't have to see Part 2 or Part 1 in order to watch Part 2. The same thing with the Henry VI. Each play stands by itself. You can do them in a sequence, and you know, certainly many have. That was one of the first times I can remember getting turned on by theater. The RSC did what they called the War of the Roses. It was back in the 80s, and they started it. Richard II, I think, and then did the Henrys, Henry IV. Then did the sixes, and then wrapped it all up with Richard. Sort of during the time of Nicholas Nickleby, so people like these big, long, epic, 75-hour productions.
That is true. Nicholas Nickleby. I think on Broadway HD, it's like 8 different parts with like Roger Rees. It's a mammoth thing. But I'm with Ryan. I actually qualified this as a prequel because for me, I saw this play as kind of the start of the Falstaff decline that ends with his passing in Henry V, because when we end with Falstaff and Merry Wives, he's now failed. He's got to pay back Mr. Ford, and then he kind of gets out of Windsor. Kind of, I assume he probably didn't pay Ford back and just kind of escaped off to London. Meets up with Hal. He finds he finds like this last kind of lifeboat in Hal. Then Hal kind of chucks him off the lifeboat. Ultimately kind of leading to Falstaff's final goodbye via Mistress Quickly in Henry V. So what I liked about it was that it set up Falstaff's mooching kind of braggart habits that we then see kind of amplified in the Henry IVs as well. It's kind of this growth, even though historically speaking, yes, I reading all my history books that I have on Shakespeare, Elizabeth, according to history, that she was enamored with Falstaff.
It's a bit of a conjectural theory that it's like at her suggestion that this play was written, and I think it would almost like make an interesting way of like reading the dull tear sheet scenes in 2H4 if we think of that as happening after this failure to court Mistress Ford and Mistress Page, that like now he's just turning to prostitutes and he doesn't really have any of these like grandeur ideas of himself as a lover that we see boisterously on display here in this play.
Yeah, because I'm just looking at the written timeline here. And Henry IV, Part 1 was 1596. Henry IV, Part 2 was 1597. And Merry Wives was also 1597. So they all basically came a year apart. from each other. But yeah, it's a fascinating question that I think you can go any which way. It just depends on how you do. I mean, I think I know what's his name? Citizen Kane.
Orson Welles.
Orson Welles did a whole film where he
Chimes
did,
at Midnight. Yeah.
Bingo. Where he kind of did the whole life of Falstaff, which is a fantastic film if people want to watch that, because it is wonderful. But yeah,
before we leave this question of like sequels, prequels, I think just one last kind of thought I have on this, and it's something that Will, our artistic director, recently said on our Antony and Cleopatra panel when we were discussing, is that a proper sequel to Julius Caesar? And he brought up the point of what does it do for an audience to read these works as companions and to think of them as being in dialogue with each other. And on that note, while there are certainly interpretations that we can come up with about Falstaff and the gang, I think both plot-wise and thematically, these plays really don't have a lot to say to each other. This is pretty much just a sex romp farce that has very little to do with like the loyalty and honor themes that we see in the two Henry IV plays. So yeah, I think that is a worthwhile lens to apply to this question, even if it might be fun to try to connect these dots and put it in the proper order.
I mean, that's the beautiful thing about theater. There are no wrong answers. Everything is subjective and just a fun way to play and find a new angle. But yeah, okay, let's dive into the next question, because we're going into the Stratford timeline. Funny enough, so this production, as we said, was set in the 1950s, and this was last done in 2011, and it also starred Geraint Davies as Falstaff, and it actually also featured Lucy Peacock, as well as Mistress Ford, and Laura Condolin as Mistress Page, and reverse. I believe. Nope, sorry, other way.
Reverse that reversal.
Yes, correct. Lucy was Ford, Laura was Page, and that one was set in 1700s, kind of English countryside. So, which setting do we think kind of better suits the play and these characters and kind of allows a better opportunity for these characters to kind of have some more fun? Jill, I see you kind of nodding excitedly here. So
I think you already know my answer, Mac. I said this multiple times on our panels. I'm a huge fan of taking Shakespeare's works and throwing it into a more recent, current time frame. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but because Shakespeare, to us, we're so passionate about it. We understand it. We choose to recite it, act in it, read it. There is a large, I feel like with the panels we've done where the works are thrown into more like modern contemporary-esque settings, it does a broader job of encompassing like all of its audience members. So for example, like my brother, who doesn't really like Shakespeare and is not really well versed in Shakespeare, and he sees something that's thrown in a setting that he can relate to or can kind of like latch onto, that's exciting for him. You know, it kind of has a way of lurching in more insight from broadens the horizons, I guess, of the audience. So I'm always a big advocate for placing it in more current times. So definitely the 50s. And we've talked about this already, but I just think it really allows for that physical comedy and the stereotypical archetypes that we've chatted about to really bleed into these characters, because it's very apparent on the text itself. But when you place it in this setting, with the pop of color, the pop of costumes, each individual really does become an individual, and it just heightens everything so much more. You know, even the chase around goblins scene and being placed in Halloween, and it was very like cat and mouse 1950s Abbott and Costello-esque, you know, or even large chunks of this piece of text is, you watch a scene and you're like, okay, was that really needed? Or like, did we just watch a whole scene of a lot of like nothingness? But that again was like a lot of 1950s sitcom, again, going back into like Abbott and Costello, like who's on first, what's on second, I don't know, who's on third. Like 40 minutes later, you're like, okay, we're at the exact same spot we were. And the thing I really liked about this particular production is because it was either set in like either a bedroom or a yard, and yard meaning like a house yard or like a farm yard. You really were in the same place all the time. So it added like that 1950s, like we've already chatted about, like I Love Lucy sitcom setting-esque thing. So yeah, so really hits on the physical comedy that the 50s lends beautifully to this text. And sorry, I'm just consulting my notes. Yeah, the 1700s I feel like would work too, but like we've already chatted about too, like something like Falstaff's gang, I feel like it would be a lot harder to place them in different costumes or to make them have their own sort of personalities ring out. And the comedy of this piece I was actually shocked by how modern it did sound. And I don't know if it was because my mind was so tailored to like switching everything into kind of like 50s anyways, like maybe that's why I was thinking this, but I feel like I wouldn't have been able to follow as well as I did. It's taken in the 1700s particularly. So yeah, 1950s for sure. I think it's pretty perfectly set in this era.
Yeah,
and I'm with Jillian, also because of the clothes.
Yeah,
women would be in corsets, men high-waisted pants, short jackets. It really is going to inform how you move. You know, it wouldn't lend itself as easily to the physical comedy as the 50s outfits did, which were, you know, a lot looser, not so formal, not so constricting.
And sorry, just to piggyback off of that too, David, like Brigit, we've chatted about this a lot in our panels of talking about sort of like the chronology of women in Shakespeare, or like how women are presented on stage. And like, again, speaking to exactly what you're saying, David, is like the Merry Wives of Windsor, like you can technically include like all of the females or wives in Windsor, and in their costumes, like they all had an opportunity to show a little bit of that liberty, or a little bit of that sort of like 50s, like there was 50s housewife. There was Sarah Dodd's costume was brilliant as the bartender in, like with the high-waisted pants. I was like, yes, we're also representing that 50s woman. And Mistress Quickly, you know, having a bit of like the older-esque look of that too. So I think there's a lot of breathing room with the lack of corsets having the women placed in the 50s for sure.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off all this because it's something Brigit actually brought up when we were talking about this play, was how the time period of the 50s was this time of change where we were going from the I Like Ike post-war era of kind of Leave It to Beaver, and we were moving our way into the 60s and civil rights and the Kennedys and and we're starting to lead up to Vietnam, and women were going from wartime work to back to housework, and then coming back into fighting for liberation and back into the workforce. And what that did for me watching this in this play was it heightened Mistress Ford and Mistress Page, where it gave them even more oomph to what they were doing, where they were exemplifying the women of that period who were transitioning and moving their towns and communities forward with taking more action and taking more drive in this setting. And that's something I felt was missing in the 1700s, was the women just didn't have that same drive that this setting gave them. Like even the Anne Page storyline, which I found it in the 1700s, it's a very traditional young girl and suitors. Here, the fact that Anne is very much rebelling against her parents, doing the screw you, mom and dad, I'm not marrying the old doctor, or like the numbskull guy who actually says he doesn't even want to marry me, he's just doing it because he's also being forced into it too, but I'm choosing this intellectual being that is what's his name, Fenton. Yeah,
Fenton.
Fenton with the mole.
Pretty boy with a wolf.
Yes. But yeah, like that, like the '50s storyline really just kind of heightened that Anne Page and brought it into a much more modern, kind of better sitting place for me. Because I find if it's too old of a setting, that plot line can really feel dated and out of touch, and we all, and kind of makes us all really turn away from that storyline, just because it makes us all uncomfortable watching all these kind of older, I don't want to say lecherous men, but maybe Shallow's a little bit lecherous. But these kind of older, actually funny, he's shallow. But all these kind of older men kind of picking apart this young lady for her money, and yet when you give it into here time and you see her working very much against these forces and succeeding in the end, it's kind of another one of a like triumphant a bit of ending the story, and it makes that storyline a lot more palatable for our modern audiences as well. Brigit, what are your thoughts?
Well, this play is unique. It's the only one of his plays he set basically in his own time period. So the fact that you would put it in the 1700s doesn't make any more sense than putting it in the 50s. And so being the only play that he wrote about his time, there is a sort of sentimentality to it. I think because it's also it's kind of a domestic comedy, that it was one of the only plays, or maybe the only play that there weren't princes and princesses and kings and queens. It's kind of had a not a bad rap. It just isn't done because it's seen as inferior, because it doesn't have those types of characters. And I also felt that I loved the 50s because we had just come out of the Second World War, and when the men were away, the women, had to go into the factories and the shops and run them. We had the women of the CNR here in Stratford, and they were building and repairing steam engines, railway, and the production and maintenance doubled and tripled during the Second World War. And I always envisioned my characters having been one of the women from Stratford who worked at the CNR site and was like a manager. And then when the men came home, we were all told to go back into the kitchen. But she was a very, very accomplished, intelligent woman, and in fact, a feminist. And so I don't think the Merry Wives have been given enough credit for who they are, and we will get into that question. But
we will.
In terms of strong female characters, why the heck are they?
Amen. I have it written in my notes, Richard.
So this is a very unique play. So I still would say I would bring it more into the 20th century. I thought the two productions I was in were more on the money.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. Ryan, any thoughts from you on this?
I don't know how much more I have to add after all these great insights. I think, I'll get more into what I specifically like about the 50s aesthetic, I think, in the next question that's also going to address that a little bit. But yes. I just think in terms of, I didn't see the what was it, 2011 production? The prior,
the 2011 production.
Well, I didn't see it. I've watched some of the clips on YouTube that are of it, but I think so. I can't really speak to if that one works in its entirety. But something that I think always struck me about this play, and it's certainly relevant to a lot of Shakespeare stuff in general, but this play in particular really always feels to me like it could have been written today, and regardless of which period you set it in, whether it's the 1590s or the 1700s or the 20s or the 50s, it always feels like it's today commenting on the ridiculous past in a way. And I think part of why I feel that way is every one of those eras that I've just mentioned is very sexist, including today is very sexist. And I think no matter any way you slice it, the fact that we have these two very clever, brilliant, funny women just making an ass out of this failed Don Juan of a Falstaff just really feels like this subtle subversion of like how we expect these kind of gender dynamics to play out in whichever time you decide. And like, I think a production that is set just today, for example, would be just as effective at kind of pulling the rug out from just like misogynistic, like I see a production of this done today would have Falstaff be like the men's rights activist pickup artist type, you know, terrible misogynist fellow we have today. So like, I think no matter when you put it, whether it's we have Graham Abbey as our like classic square-jawed 50s husband man, as we have here, we're like, no matter where we put it, we're always kind of like subverting whatever the representation of this sexism was at the time that we're deciding. So while I do agree that this 50s aesthetic worked beautifully, and I love this production so much for it, I don't want to necessarily say, oh, this is the best way to do it, forget any other way, because I think like there's a lot of like interesting gender dynamics in like the 1700s, 1800s. Like I could picture like, you know, that production almost has like a bit of a Jane Austen feel to it, which has its own interesting marital dynamics, as you said, with the suitors. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see this. You know, what happens when you throw Mistress Page and Mistress Ford into the machinery of those otherwise kind of stuffy marital institutions.
Yeah. David, do you have any more thoughts to give on this topic before we head into the last one? Because I know you kind of piggybacked off Jill, but I want to make note.
Backing up what Ryan was saying, that's why this is the most produced playwright in the history of the world. That's why it's been done for 400 years. Because it doesn't matter what period you're in, it's relevant. It's all about universal truths of life. Things that don't change. You know, men and women, marriage has been complicated from, you know, bonking a lady over the head with a club and dragging her into the cave. I mean, and every period from then up until the present.
Yep.
Where they still need to get bonked over the head. Men need to get bonked over the head.
I'm now picturing like a Merry Wives done with like the Flintstones.
Yeah.
I'd watch it.
Absolutely.
Which was also from the 50s.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And the double bill would be Skin of Our Teeth.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh my goodness, that's perfect. Okay, so now we're going to head into kind of our last question about the production side of things before we head more into the play. But this question kind of deals more with the characters themselves. And it's, how did this modern setting for Brigit and David, how did that affect the way you performed these roles? And then on our end as viewers, Ryan, Jill, and I, how did that affect the way you viewed the characters of this play? Like, were certain things kind of brought to light that maybe you think maybe wouldn't have been brought to light in a different time period? Like, what kind of did the setting do to these characters that kind of gave them their unique spin that maybe would have been different in like the 2011 production, et cetera, like that? Brigit, why don't you start us off on this one?
I think that everything about it worked for me in terms of the design. And in doing Napoli Millionaria, even down to colors, Julie, the designer, I'd always said that green was my favorite color, so she finally got to dress me in green in Merry Wives of Windsor. So even the colors for me were because I already had a relationship with the designer. And I think she had great fun, for the most part, finding all of that stuff. And you know, what were Halloween costumes in the 50s? Like, we saw sketches, David, on the wall of people with paper bags over their heads. Like, I ended up with a paper bag on my head. That was my costume. But I think if I could redo the one I did with you, Mackenzie, I made a choice. We made a choice that even though it was during Prohibition, the women had flasks. And I'm not sure if I went back and did that again, that was a proper design choice. Because I think those women, while they might have been smoking and swilling cocktails in the 50s, being upper class, middle to upper class, I'm not sure they would have gone against Prohibition. I think they would have been proper enough they would definitely wouldn't been at the speakeasies, and they wouldn't have had gin in the bathtub. But the flasks were rampant in that production, but perhaps we didn't eat them.
Oh,
Like
that.
I think that's probably, I agree with that take, Bridget, because I think it was for the most part like women's groups and organizations and like church ladies who were behind prohibition in the first place that sometimes gets forgotten in history, but like a lot of women just like started writing letters to their congressmen, and that kind of got that policy because they were mad that their husbands were always coming home drunk, which is actually like a valid concern even if prohibition overall was a bad idea. But so yeah, maybe the women shouldn't also be taking the swigs.
Yeah.
But I also want to say that, I grew up watching I Love Lucy, and there is the famous episode, which, I was aware of coming into the show, which was the one where Milton Berle comes to stay at Lucy's house, and Ricky comes home and she knows he's jealous, so she makes him go upstairs and he puts on a dress. So it's noted as the version that is of Merry Wives of Windsor.
Yeah.
But I definitely watched a lot of I Love Lucy. I watched it even growing up. So I mean, it was just so much fun to actually inhabit that.
Yeah.
In every production you're in, really, that's what it's about. It's a collaboration between your ideas, the director's ideas, the designer's ideas, your relationship with the other actors. Me and Randy and Farhang get along famously, so the chemistry between us, that wasn't work. That was just us hanging out together. We do this, act the same way when we're up in the green room, or at a bar later. It's that's just one of the nice things about working in rep, because you have these relationships with people. You're there for a long time. You work with them a lot of times. So it doesn't matter what period it's going to be set in, what the set's going to be. It's all a collaboration. I don't go out there and do the play all by myself. It's, it's the people you see, it's the people you don't see. You don't know Jerry, who made my nose, but he was a big part of that show.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Jill.
Yeah.
What about you?
Just because we've said I Love Lucy so much, and I love that we have, because in my notes I have here I Love Lucy.
So
Just specifically in this question, Macca, you're asking it like with the modern setting, how it affects the characters. What I really saw and loved is I was able to really find distinct similarities, but more so differences between our titular women, Mrs. Page and Mrs. Ford, because of like the comedy choices, Brigit, that you and Sophie made, were so grounded in like, so for you, I saw a lot of like the I Love Lucy sort of like blunt comic releases that she kind of tosses in that sitcom quite often. And then with Sophie's take on Mrs. Ford, kind of like the exaggerated damsel, like comedy that was really popular in the 50s too, like, oh, I better not do this, like that kind of thing. And so the playfulness that the two of you had playing those opposite sides of the spectrum was so enriching to watch, on top of the text too, because again, my brain was always kind of putting a 50s glaze over this play donut the whole time, and little nuances like that really livened up both of those characters too. And we've already talked about this about Falstaff's gang too, but just kind of going more specifically, like Slender to me was your typical like 1950s nerd, and I loved in the Halloween scene when he was the one doing the sound effects, and I'm like, oh, there's definitely those kids, there's those guys, you see in all these old shows where they're like, ooh, like get my hands on the next like technological antenna thing, which to a modern audience you're laughing so much too, because you're like, that's still so dated, but to them it was brilliant. Even like Simple, with his simplicity of a yo-yo and a cat's cradle, like again, these are elements and things that just the modern setting of the 50s really played into, like we've already chatted about too, the individualistic qualities that all these characters do have. And what's really interesting is, of all the characters, to me, Falstaff seemed like he wasn't a part of this time, or the way he was dressed or the way he was carried. I could have seen him in like the 30s or like the early 1900s, or like, and to me that was interesting, seeing his physicality, even the comedy at how Geraint was playing it, matched with his costumes. It emphasized even more like how much he's in the wrong of these two women, you know. And it was like, even the way that he's sick and he deals with his sickness, right? I'm like, that's such an old school way of doing that. Or the way that they dress him in the robe, I'm like, that's such an old school way of doing that. And quite honestly, like, he has such an old school mentality with these women and the way he wants to like get his money. So that was super awesome too, like that contrast to the 1950s setting. Yeah.
Piggyback off of that, because like, I definitely see where you're coming from on this, Jill, but I kind of have to disagree, because to me, Falstaff in this production called to mind two very specific points of reference in 1950s comedy, and that's Jackie Gleason and, even perhaps more importantly, Benny Hill, who, I don't know if you've ever watched the Benny Hill show, but this is, like, I grew up with all this stuff long after the 50s, of course, but like, yeah, just this idea of, I probably shouldn't have been watching this as a child, come to think of it, but just this idea of, oh, my dad. But yeah, just this, like, this kind of like ridiculous, lecherous, pervy, you know, larger than life fellow who is just like, everything goes wrong for him because he's not as good at this as he thinks he is. Like, that's Falstaff in this production in a nutshell. And that, I think, yeah, the Benny Hill show started in like 1955, so that really, like, even if he felt like maybe like an out of time character, and like Falstaff will always kind of, I think, have the legacy of other Falstaffs behind it. I definitely felt like, oh, this is like a real 50s Benny Hill take on the character. I think also, yeah, obviously the I Love Lucy stuff we've kind of done to death. There's one thing that, like, I did note, and Mac, you got your wish. I have a quote from the play. And this isn't even really about the time period, but it kind of like goes, I couldn't think of any other time to bring this up in this list of questions we have. But it kind of fits into what I was saying earlier about how this feels like a subversion, like a contemporary subversion. And it's actually something that I think this production did brilliantly that I can't say I've ever seen before. And David and Brigit, if you want to like comment on if or when this idea came in the process, if you know. But the final line of the play, which in the text is spoken by Master Ford, and the brilliant decision that was made in this production is to have Mistress Ford speak it. So in case we're forgetting, I will read, because I wrote it down, the final line of the play, which is originally spoken by Master Ford. Sir John to Master Brooke yet shall hold your word, for he tonight shall lie with Mistress Ford. That's how the play ends. So if you keep it as is in the text, it's basically the husband saying, now that we've sorted out all of this miscommunication and had our fun, I'm going to go sleep with my beautiful wife, and you don't, nya, 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 nya. But by putting that line in Mistress Ford's voice, it becomes something very different. It's basically her saying, I've had fun messing with you, Falstaff, but truth be told, I am faithful to my husband, and now that he's learned his valuable lesson, he and I can continue to be happy with our marriage. And I can't imagine seeing, like, on a big Stratford stage, or even just like in a small scale production, now that I've seen it this way, I can never now imagine seeing a production keeping the line in the original voice, because that just seems gross now. I don't know, Brigit, David, you have any thoughts? Was this like from the beginning that was the script you were given with her, with having that line, or?
That came about very late in rehearsal, like when we were on stage rehearsing by that time. Wasn't it, Bridge?
We reassigned a lot of lines in that final scene.
Yeah.
Also, I want to say that maybe this doesn't need to be said, but we did change a lot of the words in the text. So
Yes.
Bill says it felt very modern. That's because we changed a lot of words as modern as possible to at least bring it up to 1950. So pounds were dollars. We always struggled with Windsor because the thought was we were in a town not unlike Stratford, Ontario, but we could never really get away from locations. We changed money, we changed line assignments. It was a real effort to tell a different story, to give authority, to give those women the power, to at end of day decide, if she was going to sleep with her husband that night. And that would have come out of one of the lines that Meg had, my character, which was, is there not a double excellency in this? Because it wasn't enough just to fool around with Falstaff and get him off our scent, but to actually show our husbands their transgressions. So it was all part of the same thing. But yeah, there was a real effort we reassigned lines, and we eliminated stuff. We took out a lot of stuff, as David said, when we finally got closer and closer to previews, of just humiliating Falstaff. At a certain point, we cut a whole bunch of lines too, because we cut out the puffed up, we took out a whole bunch of stuff because the situation we had already
You'd already won.
We'd already won. It was redemption already. We'd already made our points to him, to our husbands, to the community. And so we didn't keep beating him over the head with these insults. So yeah, but we kept chipping away at it.
And just to add to Ryan's thing of the words being in Mistress Ford's mouth as opposed to Mr. Ford's mouth, I do agree. There's where the end of the play ends through the agency of one of our titular characters too, right? Who is a woman. So it's like rightfully done. But even going more so, like, I don't necessarily think just that line alone is saying, oh, this has been fun, but now I'm going back to be loyal with my husband. I think there's a beautiful, like, we talk all about like physical comedy. There's the women and like their sense of physical and like sexual selves are leached out through this production too. And I think it was lovely seeing the way that Sophie kind of delivered that line of she kind of had the reins and it was, like she was in charge of their relationship and what might happen that night or down the line too. So it's like the loyalty is there, but it's like I'll call the shots too, which we don't get to see very often in Shakespearean females. So yeah, just to add to that.
For me, I kind of got a weird kind of somber tangent that kind of came from this question when I was looking at it. And what this production highlighted for me was the treatment of the characters of Parson Hugh and Dr. Caius, where the whole town kind of goes against, plays this kind of mean joke on them, where they pit them against each other, and they're throwing all these barbs at like the Welshman and his cheese, and it was this thing of like the treatment of the outsider in a community was really kind of highlighted here, and that's something kind of Antoni Cimolino talked about as well in his kind of concept video that I found. And it was just kind of like how, even though this set in the 50s, I'm like, this still kind of happens today, where we see these people from other cultures and other communities come into this kind of white suburban neighborhood area, and they're not and they're not treated the same way. A lot of times there are these little kind of behind the door snickers or little barbs that are thrown. And that's kind of this, once again, this darker undertone of this play that we oftentimes kind of gloss over, because Dr. Caius, he is written to be very funny with all his backgrounds, or Parson Hughes and his wonderful kind of little Welsh tribbles that he does. But when you realize what they're doing to these poor men throughout the whole play, like especially like Dr. Caius, where at the end he's kind of left kind of like Malvolio to storm off saying, I will get my revenge on all of you for what you've done to me. It made me sit back and think and kind of go, there's something in that clown subplot that Shakespeare gives us all the time that there's this darker underside to it, that the 50s kind of, because once again the 50s was that ramp up into the civil rights movement that we saw go into the 60s, and we're seeing this, and once again it was this kind of treatment of these outsiders, these people who were different, whether because of their country or their accent, like there was like, it was just kind of the way they all get treated for like no good reason, like the mistress of the garter has no reason to treat these men this way, and the fact they do get their revenge on them via the Germans and the horses, but it's still the fact that like they're not treated the nicest by this community, and it was kind of something that kind of made me think and kind of go, these characters that I'm laughing at, there's something a little bit more to this, kind of the sad clown versus the jovial clown. So that was something I kind of came from. Ryan, I see you stroking your goatee here.
Like I see where you're coming from, Mac, and I'm inclined to agree. Something like with these two characters though, like it always kind of seems to feel like it's in good fun with them. Like, and especially like one of them is the local priest who kind of presides over this entire community. The other is a wealthy doctor. So like I feel like we can't pity them too much. To me, Falstaff is so much closer to Malvolio than either one of them, like in this encounter, like in terms of his end in this play. But like in terms of this idea of like just, you know, othering and marginalizing people in this play, something that I thought this production did very interestingly and well is just the way that we had these two interracial couples as like our central figures in here, and that despite the 50 setting, that was never remarked upon as out of the ordinary. I thought that was just like a very like subtle way to not I don't know if anyone has like further comment on that, but I thought that was like, we're like, sure, we have these like two white guys who, sure, they're from elsewhere in Europe, so we can other them in a way, but it like never exceeded like any kind of like rib tickling. And I think a worse director might have taken the opportunity to use this 50 settings to really try to make this big race commentary that I'm glad this production kind of just like treated as a non-issue that maybe is more powerful in that way.
Did you, Brigit and David, did you guys have any like in the room discussions about that at all, or like what was it just
is what it is?
Is what it is, yeah.
Well, in terms of racism in Elizabethan times, I did a study on this once. You won't find the word racism in the canon. It didn't exist. The English hated everybody.
That's true.
The Welsh weren't white, they were Welsh. The French weren't white, they were French. The Italians weren't white, they were Italians. This whole concept of whiteness has only evolved in the last 150, 200 years. Actually, 16th century. That's when they came up with the concept of race. Before that, it didn't really exist. We were tribal, certainly. As far as separating humans into racial categories, that didn't happen until after Shakespeare's time. Actually, Shakespeare's time was the beginning of the slave trade, if you really want to get into it. And in the 50s, an interracial couple would have been an enormously big deal. I am the product of an interracial couple in the 50s, and it was an enormously big deal. But this was the Merry Wives of Windsor. It wasn't Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
Or Othello, for that matter.
Or Othello, for that matter, but Othello's a whole nother one.
Tune in for that later. But yeah, I don't know. Like, for me, like, it was just these characters that I mean, when I saw this at Stratford and I was sitting there watching, like, I was killing myself laughing with that wonderful depiction of Dr. Caius. But the more I rewatched the production via my Cineplex account, the more I just kind of had a bit more of a tickle in my heart for these two men. Like, it was just fascinating. Like, which is one of these wonderful little bits of character work. But either way,
I think that had to do with the actors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
basically you're looking at broad stroke caricature stereotypes.
Yeah.
And the actors, Gord Miller and Ben Carlson, humanize them. So
Yeah.
you
Yes.
would feel for them.
Mhm.
It'd be very easy to just play a big stereotype, big caricature of a stereotype. But because these are such fine actors, you know, they bring the human heart to it and touch your heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these
David,
are
you-
two roles that like are particularly hard to get away from the caricature because they're written in dialect in the text. That's
Yeah.
not an acting or directorial decision. Shakespeare made that decision a long time ago for you. And I can't imagine any way to really like editorialize that as an actor. Just say, I'm not going to say bagar, I'm going to say holy smokes. And like, that's just going to like completely like change everything. But
You need those bagards. They're
Credit to the actor, Gord Miller, making bagar make sense.
Yeah.
Because it's so difficult just reading this play. You could just be going, what is going on? What's he talking about? Gord not only brought a human to it, but brought clarity to it too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I have to say the slapstick between those characters was probably one of my favorite things about this production. Like the fight choreo, the blocking, the falling into the cow patties, everything with like throwing the saber over to rugby and having him catch it and it pains him every time. Like,
Gord got drowned almost every night after his big scene with the swords. And Jonathan passing the swords back and forth before as they're going off to the duel. Absolutely, no, he's funny.
It was a tough act to follow.
You know,
that's when you were introduced basically to my character, was following that scene. I backstage to go, oh shit.
No pun intended, literally. Yeah.
No, I'm talking about the first Caius.
Oh, right.
Where he's tossing the sword across the
symbol.
room and
But
symbols.
also, you know, growing up with Inspector Clouseau, I mean, the clown work that Gord Miller brought to that part was a lot like Sellers' Clouseau, right? And I grew up with that too. I mean, I guess I guess what's difficult about this is the, you know, making fun of the other, but maybe that's good for us to sit in an evening in a theater.
Yeah.
You know, we've had a lot of stuff, Stratford in the last 6 months, and Black Lives Matter, and a lot of illumination of how much racism is still in Stratford in 2020. And, you know, you and most people come to Stratford and you see the swans on the river and you have a smart, you know, picnic and you come and see Shakespeare and you go away. But being someone who doesn't look like they're from here is not easy. But, you know, community includes everyone. And so I hope too that when we take time in a play to take the piss out of the other, that we also realize that we probably are doing that in our own lives, and that we should correct ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well said, Brigit. Well said. And actually, Brigit, I'm going to have you lead off on the next question, because we're diving into textual questions. And the first one is, why are Mistress Page or Mistress Ford often overlooked when scholars, Shakespeare enthusiasts, discuss the strong female characters of the Shakespeare canon?
Because they're dicks.
I think we can leave it at that.
Next question.
Why? Because what I said is that because it is seen as a you know, as a domestic comedy, it's not valued the same way. It's you know, I don't know. I think also they confound people. They are not that they took their own initiative, that they came up with this plan, that they executed it without permission and without consulting and without help from their guys. That's unusual. But you know, they're Juliet 20 years later. Like you know, these women do exist. It's just that also in Shakespeare's canon, it's not a lot of parts for women this age. So the Quickleys and the Page and Miss Ford, those are older women. But they are the older version of our Juliets and Julias, and you know, it's just unfortunate that the world has decided this is somehow an inferior play, you know.
I'll piggyback off that, Mac, if you don't mind.
Yes, please, Jill. Please.
So similar, many similar points to what Brigit's saying, and even earlier too, a thing I have in my notes and it's highlighted is that they're like not regal, like they're not born into. It's interesting though, because to me these two characters seem like innately strong and confident, whereas the other, you know, strong women in Shakespeare's canon seem to be like born into like I said, like born into a regal status, or like given permission to be strong, where it's like then I have in big stars in my notes, they have the perfect balance of like comedy, trickery, like wit and wisdom that you see in all of the other Shakespearean women, like a Portia, a Rosalind, but in my opinion, like these two characters have all of it, and they have all of it from the very beginning, and in my opinion, like that makes them stronger for it. And it's interesting, I kind of thought of, you know, okay, well, what is the difference between, if this is kind of like the strongest of the strong Shakespearean women? It's interesting because their plot, being the Merry Wives of Windsor, to me is very, this whole piece is very like B-plot-esque. So I think it kind of starts with like this piece not really having the weight that other pieces have. So that kind of goes against them. But then I'm like thinking their strength and their comedy kind of happens right away. And it's very vibrant and it's very in the now. And I think of other, you know, strong female women, even not even talking about like your typical Portias, Desdemonas, what have you, but like a Queen Margaret or a Joan, and it's like those, they're strong because they're plotting in battle or in death, and it's like, oh, that warrants a woman to be strong, when it's like, no, like a human woman having this like beautiful rainbow of like I was saying, like trickery, wit, wisdom, comedy, sexual appearance, like all these things are thrown right at you. And it's like a way more colorful palette, in my opinion, than we see in a lot of other like Shakespeare's strong women. And another interesting thing of maybe why they're not as revered is because, like I say, it's very innate and kind of in your face from the very beginning. Whereas these other strong female characters, there's like an arc that you see their strength, or you see how they're given their strength, or they start as like a daughter and then they become a woman. And that's fine too, but there's something like wonderful to have like these women just sort of have their identities already. And it doesn't seem, to me, it doesn't really seem like a male has written these women either, because of the sort of breadth that they have, which is kind of refreshing to see too. Yeah, so I think they're the strongest in my opinion, but clearly the rest of the world doesn't think so.
They're an interesting couple too. You know, we began rehearsal and the thought was that they knew each other in the community, and because they were both from mixed marriages, they would have acknowledged each other and they would know each other.
Yeah.
But in that first official scene in what we said in the beauty parlor, they were a perfect union. It took both of them to come up with the plot. You know, they would not have done it individually.
Right.
They were a perfect couple.
Yeah.
If I can piggyback off of
Yes,
that,
please.
I think that dovetails very nicely into a point I wanted to bring up. So this is the only Shakespeare play whose title refers to women in the plural and refers to women without a man also being in the title. The only other titular female characters in Shakespeare are coupled: Juliet, Cleopatra, Cressida. Otherwise, if it's a singular name and a title, it's male. And yeah, women can only be in titles if they're coupled with a man. Because, like you say, Brigit, it's the two of them together. And I think there might be a tendency to, when you read this on the page, no pun intended, to find them maybe a little interchangeable. Because when we think about, like, and I think it is like the duty of like very talented actresses to like really differentiate them in the performance. That's what you and Sophie did so well, like in this performance, Brigit. Like, but I think when we think about like the really like star-making vehicles of like the highly coveted female roles in the canon, it's always like the one very prominent female character in the play. It's the Portia, it's the Beatrice, it's the Rosalind, it's like Viola, Cleopatra, Juliet, and we think like you're not gonna like see a line that's like a Beatrice line and think, oh, is that Beatrice or is that Hero? Whereas you can find a really funny line of, in this play, whereas like, oh, is that Page or is that Ford? They're both so funny, I can't tell. Like, of course, the funny line's the Beatrice line. She's the only funny lady in that play. Like, so, I think the fact that we tend to put currency on this, like, I guess, romantic individualist idea of who are like the strong singular characters, and the fact that this play has like a bit of more of a collective vibe to it and it's very amazing female characters almost has become a point in its like to its detriment.
I can piggyback off that a little bit just about the women because I think one of the reasons why we overlook them is because of how we always market this play. Even though it's called the Merry Wives of Windsor, and even I fell into this trap when I was introducing it as the Falstaff spin-off prequel play, like a lot of times we center on the Falstaff side of it and we totally forget that really the women are like, all the women, Anne, Quickly, Ford, Page, all these women are driving plot forces of the play that the men are always reacting to, that we market it in reverse. But beyond that, I think one of the other big things that also tying back with Ryan in the text is a lot of times when women are doing the traditional Shakespeare audition monologues, they're going to go for a Olivia, a Portia, a Viola, a Rosalind, a Beatrice. And Mistress Quickly and Mistress Ford have these great kind of pairing dialogue scenes, but like it's hard to give the one great Portia quality of mercy monologue to these characters. So unfortunately, when they're kind of relegated to having to be either done as a scene study or as when you're doing the production, you don't get that outside here, use this elsewhere situation. I feel sometimes we kind of forget about how wonderful their dialogue is. But yeah, I think that was one of the big reasons why we often overlook them, is just because it's hard to kind of get them outside of the play to use them elsewhere compared to these other sweeping emotional monologues that Shakespeare gave these other female characters of the canon. Like, this is such a wonderful, common, down-to-earth, very human play that trying to extract something from there it's tricky. Like I was watching going, what could you take? Like, I guess you could take your monologue from the beauty shop when you're reading the letters, but it's tricky because it's a long bit of monologue that trying to like be like, you got 1 minute to do your traditional monologue, and it's like, which one do I do?
Yeah,
that's gonna pack the punch.
And it's and it's uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. I mean, it really was about fat shaming too, right? So as we move forward, when we all get back to theaters, we have to, we have to find a new vocabulary. These monologues, like in the way that we did change the words in the script to make it more 1950s. And like, maybe that's not a monologue you want to do. Maybe it's just not funny, out of context. It's not funny. It's cruel. So, Yeah.
Also, these women we mentioned too, like being older, like older women in Shakespeare's canon too. It's just like unfortunate because yeah, like a lot of their comedy, like I would love to like take their pieces, but it's the classic golden rule of, hello, you don't look like you're married. Why are you doing a monologue married with children? I'm like, yeah, you're totally right. So it's like you don't really necessarily have the opportunity to get these characters' voices in your mouth until you are older too, which like I said is unfortunate because the comedy and the strength that these women have like resonates definitely to women of my age too, but yeah, unless it was a whole like younger adaptation, but that would take a lot more reworking and it wouldn't even play into the piece. So
when I mentor young actors now, especially the females, because that's who they hook me up with at the festival, I say, which Shakespearean character do you most identify with? Because we are at a point in time where that's infinitely more interesting and important.
yeah,
That it actually is an expression of you and what you're going through right now. I don't care what gender it is. I don't care if it's a king, a duchess, or whatever. If you identify, go for it.
Love it. Yeah.
And I
Snaps. Okay, good. That's good to hear.
I can't wait to see, hopefully next year, when we can see Amaka's Hamlet, because that will be so exciting.
It's going to be beautiful.
David, what are your thoughts on this, besides your wonderful one-liner you got right off the top?
I think you guys have covered it.
Okay. Wonderful. But David, I do want you to kick off the next question, which is, why do you think this is one of Shakespeare's least performed plays of the canon? Like, it's not, as we said, we get these long gaps of time when we don't see it done, unless Brigit gets lucky, like she did, where she did it within a 5-year span of time. But normally it's long gaps. So why do you think that is?
Well, like Brigit said, it's it's considered a domestic comedy. It doesn't have the big, huge, epic struggle of power and throne and empire that's associated with Shakespeare. But I think this production absolutely proved how commercially viable it is, how much fun it is, and it should be done more often. Again, it takes a deft hand to put this show up, to give it comedy, to give it levity, to give it weight. You got to be good.
Yeah. You really do. And actually, I'll piggyback off you on that, David, because I wrote this basically the same line in mind, which was this can fall flat very quickly with the wrong director.
Exactly.
And it's because of the language. Like, there's a lot of wordplay in here, like in that first scene between Slender, Parson Hugh, and Justice Shallow, where they're all kind of bantering those mismatched words. And because audiences don't know the plot of this as well, they're missing where the humor of this play is, which is a lot of times in the misreading of lines or dialogue to each other. And unfortunately, because this isn't a well-known plot, like I remember when I did it with Theater by the Bay, I actually wrote my family a 8-page play synopsis that I gave them before opening night and said, read this so you know what's going on, because this won't be a play you can easily kind of jump into. Because that first scene where you're talking about Shallow and his venison and all that kind of stuff, it can go right over the audience's head. Because if they're not quick enough on the draw to catch what's being talked about. So yeah, I think this actually is one of these plays actually can really scare a director who doesn't have a really solid concept like Antoni did of how do I tackle this and how do I adapt this and make this work, because it can fall flat really fast. Like, nothing against the 2011 production, but I remember watching that at Stratford Shakespeare School, and I didn't get it really at all until the following year when I did it with Brigit, and I actually finally really had a chance to sit down and understand what was going on. Watching it cold, like I did, was really hard to kind of fully wrap my brain around. So I really do think that David, I just said the sitcom-y human kind of plot that is taking place, and then on top of that you have this wordplay language that is language we don't speak every day. So to pile that all on, it can make it in the wrong director's hands, it can fall flat very quickly.
Again, credit to Antoni. I mean, clarifying the script. Brigit already mentioned. We changed words and got rid of the obscure words. Come up with a modern equivalent and let them riff on that. Again, credit to Antoni. It's difficult. It's funny you mentioned that first scene. We rehearsed. We put hours and hours and hours and hours and hours into that scene, finding the rhythm, finding the beats, finding what works, what doesn't work. Hours and hours and hours. Again, Antoni driving.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mac, I'll take you mentioned the word quickly at the end of your statement, so I will take that. They'll take that quickly, because I think for a couple of reasons we've already chatted about. Why is this one of the least performed Shakespeare plays? Well, it is known that this play was written quite quickly. Like we've already mentioned, the Queen was wanting this to be written, and I read somewhere, that it was like 14. He had a deadline of 14 days or something. So a lot of literary folks see this as being more like a quickened write of Shakespeare's canon. So maybe that alone kind of shocks or scares directors away from, not having like the wonderful groundedness and kind of like needing of all of his other texts kind of give us. And also we've already mentioned before too, like this piece seems quite B plot to me in general. Like there is a B plot to this piece, but it's just a lot more like low stakes than the stuff we've been chatting about. And to me, it's like you can see Falstaff in a more serious play if you really want to see a Falstaff. So like, this is kind of just a quick little ditty. But something that just kind of came to my mind with this production in particular, this play has a large cast, like many Shakespearean plays do, but I think it's through seeing it through the scope of this production. I didn't want there to be double casting, and there wasn't really. Like, and a really good example of this is Mike Shera as Fenton. Like quite literally, he's not on stage often. Like he has small cameos here and there, but the character is of importance to the plot. But the physicality that like he particularly gave to that character, I didn't want to see him in any other character. And so that was cool. Like, and I could probably say that to everyone in this cast that wasn't double casted. There's a lot you could do. Like you can double cast, absolutely, but it leads, I think, better to the plot overall when it's not. So maybe surely by the fact of like honoring this piece with a large cast, and that may not be available to you, or you might not have, like David was saying, like you have to be smart to like pull off this piece too. Like you might not have that group, that company, that chemistry that is really needed. And like we've mentioned before, like these are almost all of our A-listers from Stratford that we've seen in this series were in this production. And that was just so, you could see the chemistry between that too. So like it calls for, and that's the whole thing with comedy as well to me. Like you got to be comedy and tragedy. Like you almost have to, not, I don't want to say smarter, but you definitely have to be more on your toes and like more in the know with what you're putting forth with a comedy, in my opinion. And that takes a prowess. It takes a team to kind of like put that forth. And if you don't have the bodies to do that, then like, I don't think you can pull off this piece to the beauty that it can be, if that makes sense.
I will say, having done double casting with this show, it's tough. Like I know when Brigit and I did it too. Like Sheldon Davis, he was Dr. Caius, and he was I think he was Pistol or Bardolph, one of the two of them. I forget which one he ended up as. but I don't even think we had a Jack Rugby in that production, just because we didn't have enough people in the cast to pull that bit of cameo work off. But yeah, this is one of those really tough plays where it's really tough to double cast. Like, there were moments where I would leave one scene as Peter Simple and be right back on, and 5 seconds later as Robin doing another scene entirely. This is one of these weird Shakespeare shows where double casting almost isn't an option. Like, you are basically you're set for the night with who you are. You're not gonna do any more other fun stuff. You are Pistol or Nym or Fenton or Shallow. Like, it was all very and
like David was saying too, when you have all of those different flavors, you know, and you can kind of like stay in your own flavor lane, it adds to the whole bouquet of the piece even more. Like, I would imagine, Mac, like that would have been like to switch on a dime, like having such contrasting physicalities and mental states for those characters.
I tried.
Like, you know, as opposed to just, you know, being a choral member and having to kind of blip in and out. That's one thing, but there's a strong presence with all of these like side characters in this piece too, that I think warrants again to play into like the individualistic nature that exists in this piece. Yeah.
Brigit, what do you think about why this play isn't performed more? Do you want it to be performed more? Now that you've done it twice in 5 years.
I don't know. I'm just like not sure about theater in general right now. I'm like, I don't know how we all come back to the room. I really don't. I mean, David's mentioned this. That's why this playwright has existed this long. But I think moving forward, we can do these plays, but we have to find the context in which we can present these plays. But that's just me talking to you guys. I really don't know. I don't know if, you know, there's so many times when we do a production, I'm not just talking Stratford, just anywhere, because, you know, shows are in the wall, like they're just in the ether, right? Like everyone does that play at every theater at one time. But just, you know, how are we going to move forward? What plays can we actually do? But this playwright has sustained many centuries. But I think moving forward, we have to do his plays in context. They can't be all of themselves anymore.
Well, that journey's already started. You know, cross-gender casting, cross-racial casting, all of that stuff is already starting to happen. Even before the lockdown came along.
But
what we do after will just be a continuation. Again, that's why he survived for 400 years, because he lends himself to adaptations of the time and place where it's being done. A production of the Scottish play is going to be very different in Scotland than it will be in South Africa. You know, but it would work in either country, you know, because again, they're going to bring what they have to the table and add on to these texts. And certainly our perspective on life has been completely changed in the last 6 months. And that new perspective is what we're going to be bringing to the table when we get back into the room.
And we will. Theater always survives. I mean, Shakespeare survived one plague all in his own time where theaters weren't open, and we're all going to come back and get right back into this for sure. Ryan, do you have any final thoughts about least performed play?
I actually have an idiosyncratic comment on this one.
Ooh.
I blame Harold Bloom.
Oh.
Like, I know we're not supposed to speak ill of the dead. We just lost him in October, but he was also like a really shitty person, pardon my language. And like, sorry, Brigit, did you not know that Harold Bloom died?
No, and I didn't know he was shitty either. I mean,
okay, well, just
his books are all through my house. What do you want to do now, right?
Well, like his books are all about how, oh no, these feminist Marxists and post-colonial scholars are ruining my white man's canon, boo-hoo. But and like there's a lot of sexual assault allegations against him from his female students. And so I do not endorse him as a person. I had a phase when I read a lot of his books when I was younger, and thankfully have grown out of that. But yeah, Harold Bloom specifically, who was very influential in the 90s and onwards in terms of shaping this idea of, the Western canon, the Shakespeare canon. Shakespeare invented the human, kind of nonsense statement that he spends like 1,000 pages not defending well. Anyway, sorry, can you tell I'm bitter? But Harold Bloom frequently says in his books, and he frequently says it because most of those very long books are just him repeating things he said in his previous very long books. But Harold Bloom frequently says that Falstaff is one of his favorite characters, specifically the Henriette Falstaff is one of the best characters, if not in all of Shakespeare and all of world literature. He's a cosmos onto his own, he says, like very abstractly without kind of defining why. And I think Falstaff, especially in the Henriette's a great character. But every time he brings up how great the Henry IV Falstaff is, he adds the caveat, and there's that pale imitation of Falstaff in that much worse play, Merry Wives of Windsor. I'm surprised Shakespeare even wrote that. And because of how influential Bloom was, and especially among straight white cis male, i.e. the kinds of people who make a lot of these programming decisions, I think there is this internalized bias that maybe came from his outgrown influence.
And I think that extends from what Brigit said earlier on when she's working with young mentors. Do a monologue that appeals to you. I think Falstaff really appeals to this Mr. Bloom guy. It's something we can relate to. You know what I'm saying?
It's exactly brings us back to the Pericles comment when I was like, well, you know what? It is a moldy play.
Ben Jonson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all. That's my mini Harold Bloom rant. Sorry to
That's
the family of Harold Bloom if you're watching
editing
this, but
No, but it's
very
interesting, right?
informative.
Like that, our bookshelves are full of his books. That's it absolutely was. We were told that he was the
authoritative scholar.
Yeah.
And has influenced the way Shakespeare's been done for the last 2, 3, 4 generations. So, yeah.
Well, Ryan, look at that. I mean, I'm leaving that whole rant in.
You can. I wouldn't have said it if I didn't want you to leave it in. It's fine.
All right. Well, let's head into the final question of the night, which is really a fun one because now we get to play mix and match Shakespeare, basically. And it's if you could put Falstaff in any other pre-existing Shakespeare play, which would it be, and how might his presence change or affect the plot? Ryan, I want you to start this one.
Because I pitched this question?
Yes. You came up with this brilliant question.
I give the credit to this question to the much better, in my opinion, but still kind of old, antiquated Shakespearean scholar, A.C. Bradley, because he has this interesting little nugget of an idea in his book, Shakespearean Tragedy, where he said that so much of the tragedy in Shakespeare is the characters being in the wrong play, that if you were to switch Hamlet, the character Hamlet, and the character of Othello and put them in each other's plays, the tragedy couldn't happen because Othello would just instantly say, okay, gotta kill Claudius, stab, done, I did it. And Hamlet would immediately see through Iago's game and just drive him crazy with all these mind games like Hamlet is wont to do. So I think it's just a fun thought exercise to always take characters and move them in and out of different plays just as a fun exercise. And Falstaff being this character that appears in Merry Wives this way, for whatever reason, whether it was at the Queen's recommendation or not, gives us this good pretext for shuffling him around.
I think we should put Falstaff in Othello as Othello's kindly uncle, so he can make Othello wise to what Iago's up to.
Yes.
Oh, I like that.
There it is.
Play.
Where's my typewriter? I'm going to write it right now. Notice I said typewriter, eh?
Yeah.
I love it. Perfect. Ryan, how about you? Where
Well,
are
like,
you sticking Falstaff?
the obvious answer, it's probably the more boring answer, so I might follow it up with a different one if you don't mind. But I think the obvious answer is I wish Falstaff didn't die in Henry V off stage, because I would like to see what Falstaff's life after being rejected by Hal at the end of 2H4 would look like. Like I want to have this like subplot of Falstaff going on in that play. Yeah, David, you want to comment on that?
Taxi driver.
Taxi driver.
Taxi driver.
Well, I think it's interesting because, like, for those who watched this like recent Timothée Chalamet movie King that was on Netflix, so Mac and Jill and I watched it together one night. But like,
Oh yeah.
that movie kind of basically did the pitch that I'm describing, minus the part where Hal rejects Falstaff, because for some reason in that movie, Falstaff, who was a fictional character, by the way, loosely based on Sir John Oldcastle, but like Falstaff wasn't real in this like supposedly serious history movie that's not a Shakespeare adaptation. Anyway, but like, but Falstaff is a character in this movie who is there in the military in the Battle of Agincourt, in like the part of the plot that would be Henry V, and that he just dies in battle in this
Leading the vanguard.
Yeah, like spoiler alert for this not great movie that recently came out on Netflix, but like, so yeah, like I guess that like I've got to like step away from my like obvious answer, because like I guess we kind of just saw that and it wasn't anything to write home about. But I would like to see the Shakespeare sequel version where it's actually like Falstaff and his gang having a B plot that's unrelated to what Hal is doing with the French. But I think I have a better answer. I'm sorry if this one's going to step on anyone's toes for their own answer. But I would like to take the character of Macduff from Mackers and replace him with Falstaff.
Ooh.
For two reasons. The first one being that there's that very long, kind of boring scene in like it's Act 4, Scene 3, when Malcolm is in exile building his army in Britain and Macduff is with him, and Malcolm does this like test of Macduff's morality. And I think how funny would it be if it's Falstaff who he's testing in that scene, and that would almost feel like a resurgence of the original Hal Falstaff dynamic, like the young prince who's away from home, hanging out with Falstaff and just having this witty banter between them. That would make it such a more interesting scene, and I've never seen that scene staged in a very exciting way, in my opinion. It kind of usually like grinds the plot to a halt right after the climactic Pit of Acheron scene. So I'm like, oh, we need something more exciting here. And actually like the murder of Macduff's family like would actually like maybe bring some actual like more pathos to Falstaff than we're used to seeing. But then it would also be so comical for my second reason to then have Falstaff be the only person who can defeat Macbeth, because he's the one who was ripped untimely from his mother's womb. But like to have it still be Falstaff being just a terrible soldier in this like final climactic battle, that would just make me laugh to no end. So that's my answer.
I want to see 10 pages within 2 weeks.
All right.
There it is. You have orders from David Collins.
All right, David, I'll send it to you in a few weeks.
I want scene 1 in 2 weeks, okay?
Okay, will do.
Brigit, what's your choice?
I never came up with anything really original. It just always goes back to the Romeo and Juliet thing, that if one of them just had a cell phone, it would have ended differently. I think that Falstaff maybe got Romeo drunk and discouraged him from buying the poison, and it might have ended differently.
Yeah.
But,
Falstaff as the apothecary, just being like, you sure you want this? Isn't that silly?
Let's just get drunk instead. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. But
I'm now just picturing Falstaff in like the monk hood and robe, just
Yeah, it was Friar Lawrence.
yeah, just this very kind of big Friar Tucky figure. I'm
All
getting
his herbs and spices, exactly.
Yeah. And he's like one for Falstaff and one for Romeo. Yeah.
Jill, how about you? What was your
That's
choice?
Perfect segue, because I wrote the silliest of answers. I want him to like almost make an appearance in every tragedy at the most like climactic or like tragic part. And it's just a little tidbit, and I literally wrote down, I want him to either be like eating, drinking, or sweating. Like just something that is just like right before the dagger goes in, you see a Falstaff. Or like, right before the battle goes off, there's a Falstaff. And then you just like Trump comes on as Gower and you're like, this is not going to go well, you know? And it's interesting because it's like, I feel like sometimes when I watch some of the tragedies, like the stakes are so high that it's like a bit ridiculous. And like having him like come in as a little cameo would just like mellow it out. Even having him kind of be dumbfounded, sort of like reacting to the more like grandiose speeches that are said throughout the canon too. And like some of those speeches that some audience members quite honestly are like, sure, I get what's going on. I can follow those Grecian references, of course. But then if they have a relatable character on stage being like, I'm with ya, like, I don't know what's going on. Let's take another drink. Like, just, you know, so I didn't really have a specific production, but, you know, just even him being like a spectator in the court in Coriolanus, or observing these like super big treacherous like King Lear scenes and just kind of like dodging the daggers, or like being thrown into the battle scene of R&J at the beginning, you know, and where it's especially the last production we just watched, where it's so much fighting going on, so much clutter, and there's just like a Falstaff being like, oh, excuse me, oh no, pardon me, like
with a martini glass.
Yeah. And so it almost would be like, I guess, David, I mean, I'll pitch it to you if you want me to write something up, but just like a one act of just like a montage of Falstaff. You know, he's exiled after Henry IV part 2, and he's exiled into these little cameo appearances.
I'm interested. I want 20 pages from you in 2 weeks. I've got a lot of reading.
Jill, you can have my idea. Just make it one of your scenes. It's better than writing.
You're going to start a Falstaff festival.
A Falstaff festival, exactly.
Perfect.
Festival of Fools, no pun intended.
Yes.
Starring Judy Collins as Falstaff.
Yes.
Yes, and you will be our Falstaff.
All my dreams are coming true.
Let's have a David Collins festival.
Well, no.
We're like,
I want to stay humble. You know?
You just want to be all the Falstaffs in the entire canon. Is that too much to ask?
You have seen him in mostly all of our series, and now you will see him in all of the Falstaff spin-offs. Coming to an outdoor, quarantine-safe theater space.
Drive-in theater near you.
Yes.
Pick me up on FM 87, okay?
Okay, perfect.
7.6.
So I actually had two different ones that I thought Falstaff could actually fit in pretty well. My first one was Twelfth Night, because I can totally see him having fun with Sir Toby and Sir Andrew, like just kind of roasting Malvolio, kind of just playing those tricks on Malvolio. But then I also would love to see him kind of trying to court Olivia, but then also kind of strangely becoming attracted to Cesario, aka Viola, like having like another weird love triangle situation where he doesn't fully understand why he's falling for Cesario. Like there's like just some great kind of situation comedy, and there's just once again lighten that story just a little bit more. And then the other one I think would be really interesting though is have him be part of Richard II and have him be kind of the right-hand guy of Richard, and really kind of explore that concept of Falstaff finally getting his chance to be the right-hand guy, poorly influencing a king, like he's kind of gearing up to do at the end of Henry IV Part 2, before Hal's like, screw off, no, I'm going the other direction. But instead we actually get to see Falstaff kind of being the bad influence on Richard II, which kind of leads Richard II to ending up the way he does at the end of the play, being part of that character's downfall is Falstaff.
Well, I think that would definitely change the dynamic, like with Falstaff and Bolingbroke, just to think of like when Henry IV is like, oh, my son being a scallywag with that Falstaff over in Eastcheap. Like, hey, wait a minute. So, like, you know more about this than you're letting on.
And you guys don't know how genius this idea is. Was this guy called Tom Stoppard?
Yeah.
Something called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern?
David, that's one of my favorite plays of all time.
Well, and all of these ideas are in that same vein, aren't they?
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah,
Let's do it. I'm doing it. I'm gonna do it.
Coming soon to Cup of Hemlock, the Falstaff Festival.
Yes.
Every year we got, what was it, Ryan? 36, 38?
38 if you count the
38
two co-authors.
plays.
Yeah.
So there you go. You do like 3 a year. We got a few years worth of doing a Falstaff Festival.
Perfect.
We'll be fine. These kids are going to make us work forever. It's good. We'll be fine.
Do we include the 3 plays that he's already in, or do we cut those ones because that's boring now? We want to see it.
Exactly. It's been done. It's been done.
He's exiled. You gotta make
He's
something
exiled.
with it. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, this has been so much fun. Like, I've loved tonight. But we do have to say adieu for the evening. But we will be back next week, as we'll be tackling the other 2019 production that has just been released on Cineplex, which is Othello. And David, you were part of that production. And I'm going to announce here on this episode that you will be back for that panel as well. So we will get another chance to kind of dive into a little more of the tragic side of the canon next week with you. But until then, everybody, stay healthy, stay safe. Brigit, where can people find you if they do want to talk to you and kind of...
I don't know.
More...
In my backyard.
2 feet apart, or 2 meters apart.
Yeah, feet apart, walking the river, doing the should I be on Facebook question, Twitter at Hoopoo Heart, all capital, HOOPOOHEART. Oh boy, I can spell.
Love that. Jill, where can people find you?
Yes, people can find me in my artist Instagram account, jillian.robinson96. You'll find many musical covers and updates, Cup of Hemlock stuff. I'm super excited. The next thing on the docket for me with Cup of Hemlock, I am stage managing our polished reading of The Man of Destiny by George Bernard Shaw. So that's been super fun because I've gotten to go into my stage manager side instead of performing this time around. So that's been
It's very tough
wonderful.
to be a stage manager when there is no stage.
That is very true. It's a lot of behind the scenes organizing, but it's a new world and I'm doing it. And upcoming, I have the opportunity to be playing Audrey and Second Lady in As You Like It with Cup of Hemlock and Sweet Tea Shakespeare in North Carolina, Shakespeare Indie Company. We're collaborating. We're doing a little networking read. So you'll probably see some posts on my page regarding that. And next week as well, I am starting rehearsals with Sweet Tea Shakespeare. We're doing a radio play of Two Gentlemen of Verona, and I will be reading for Lucetta. So excited to jump in. It's an all-female, non-binary cast. It's 2 gents, no gents. So super excited to jump in with that. And like I said, this is being done with Sweet Tea Shakespeare. Just plug them because we've been doing a lot of collaborations with them. They're a North Carolina company. We've been dealing with Claire Martin, their assistant artistic director, a lot. You've seen her on our panels. You will see her next week on our Othello panel, hopefully. And so that's kind of upcoming while we're still in the time of quarantining and virtual stages.
Wonderful. David, where can people find you? Can contact you?
I'm like Brigit, I'm in my backyard growing my gladiolas and my petunias. And,
so party in Stratford, is that what we're saying? We're all going to converge in your backyards?
Hopefully soon. Yes, I've been primping and preening this garden, hoping somebody's going to come over. But and I'm on Facebook. I'm sorry, I don't tweet or Twitter or Insta. I'm not that techno savvy. This new thing called Facebook just came out, so I thought.
With Facebook, David, though, do you want strangers sending you friend requests? Because that's
people do that actually all the time. It's sort of one of the perils of being in this business. And if I know you and you know enough of my friends, I'll say hi. And if I don't, but actually since the films of our productions of Shakespeare have gone out, I've been getting friend requests from all over the world. India, France, South Africa, and I'm going, what's going on? I'm going, oh, it must be the films, because Anthony was saying the other day, you know, millions of people are watching these things, and a lot of people from places that would never ever get a chance to come here. So it's interesting.
For sure. Ryan, give us your classic usual message.
You can't really find me on social media. I am on Facebook, but I don't really want friend requests from strangers. I'm not as in the spotlight as David is. I'm a dramaturg. So you could just send all that love to Cup of Hemlock. That would be greatly appreciated. They can use the friends more than I can.
That we can. And you can find me on all social media platforms, just at Mackenzie Horner. Keep an eye out. I will be playing Lieutenant in The Man of Destiny, coming out on September the 9th. So I'm getting back in the acting saddle after a good 5 years so gap of time. So it's exciting to be back doing all that again. So I'll be doing that. My podcast, Before the Downbeat. We're still releasing episodes. We're in the middle of season 2. We just released our episode all about Camelot, where we actually talked about the recent Camelot production that Stratford did with Gary Griffin. So we talk all about that, so be sure to tune in for that. We have a great, exciting new episode coming up in the next few weeks. But other than that, that's kind of it on our front, besides Man of Destiny on September the 9th. We will also be working on releasing a new series before the end of August, which is our the Cup Roundtables.
Just part of the same series, just a different branch. It's all
exactly. It's all part of the Cup, just a different sip.
I love that. Sorry, add that to everything we do now.
But yeah, I'm excited to say our first topic will be Shakespearean gender, where we'll be talking all about how we're tackling Shakespeare in this day and age, where we're seeing a lot more of these gender bent, different people taking on these classical roles, and just how we can continue to move forward doing this type of thing. So yeah, that's coming out the end of August. So keep an eye out for that new series. And I know Ryan will also be having some more wonderful interviews coming up in the near future. He just did a fantastic one with Claire Martin.
Yeah.
My goodness, Claire Martin. Claire, we love you.
Sorry, Claire.
Sorry, Claire. But yeah, she talked to us all about her 2-part wonderful adaptation of War and Peace that she has written.
So brilliant.
Yeah, so be sure to give that a watch as well. But until next week, when we talk about the wonderfully tragic, complex play of Othello, stay healthy, stay safe, everybody. Have another great week, and we will see you next time with Othello.
Cheers.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.